"You can grieve somewhere else," his mother said, her voice cutting through the silence that had fallen over the dinner table. I hadn't even finished my meal when Eleanor delivered those words, sharp, cold, final. The funeral flowers were still fresh on Nathan's grave, but his family had already begun erasing me from their world. I stood up without argument, kissed our wedding photo in the hallway, and walked out with only a small bag. They mistook my silence for surrender, my composure for weakness. What they couldn't see was the letter burning in my pocket, Nathan's final gift, his protection reaching beyond death. Let them think they'd won. Let them believe I was broken. I walked away quietly that night, not because I was weak, but because I knew they'd never see me coming. Rain slid down the windows of the funeral home, a soft pitter-patter that filled the silence where conversation should have been. I stood alone in the corner of the room, watching as people filed past Nathan's casket. My husband of 3 years, gone in an instant on a wet road much like today's. The flowers surrounding him were all white roses, his mother's choice, not mine. Nathan had loved sunflowers. Cassidy. I turned to see Eleanor Whitmore approaching, her black dress crisp and unwrinkled despite the humidity. My mother-in-law's face was a mask of composure, her eyes dry. She had always been beautiful in that cold, untouchable way, silver blonde hair pulled into a perfect chignon, not a strand out of place even in grief. "The minister wants to begin soon," she said, her voice carrying that familiar note of command rather than request. "You should be seated in the front row." "Thank you, Eleanor," I replied softly. Her eyes narrowed slightly at my use of her first name. Even after 3 years of marriage to her son, she had never invited me to call her Mom. As she walked away, I caught the whispers that followed in her wake. Poor Eleanor, losing her youngest like that. At least she still has Thomas. The wife is so young. They weren't together long, were they? The whispers trailed behind me as I made my way to the front row. I could feel Eleanor's friends watching me, assessing. I was the outsider here, the woman who had taken Nathan away from his family's expectations. He had been meant for someone from their social circle, not a bookstore manager with no pedigree to speak of. Thomas, Nathan's older brother, stood beside his mother. He nodded curtly in my direction but made no move to make space beside him in the front row. I sat down at the far end, separated from the main Whitmore family by 2 empty chairs. A physical manifestation of the gap that had always existed between us. The service passed in a blur. I didn't cry, couldn't cry, not here. Not with Eleanor's eyes occasionally drifting to me, as if measuring my grief against her own and finding it wanting. When it ended, people filed past me with murmured condolences, most quickly moving on to embrace Eleanor with far more warmth. "You'll be joining us for dinner at the house," Thomas stated rather than asked as the last mourners departed. His tone left no room for refusal. This was, apparently, my duty as Nathan's widow. "Of course," I replied. The Whitmore family estate stood on 5 acres of manicured grounds, a Victorian masterpiece that had been in the family for generations. Nathan and I had lived in our own smaller home across town, but this was where he had grown up, where family gatherings were always held. I had never felt comfortable here, with its formal rooms and family portraits stretching back decades. Dinner was served in the grand dining room, with its antique mahogany table that could seat 20. There were only 5 of us. Eleanor, Thomas's wife Sarah, some cousin whose name I couldn't recall, and me. The family lawyer, Mr. Halloran, had been invited but begged off with a prior commitment. Eleanor presided at the head of the table, with Thomas to her right. I was seated near the far end, as if an afterthought. The conversation flowed around me, but never to me. They spoke of Nathan as if I hadn't known him at all, reminiscing about childhood incidents and family jokes I'd never been privy to. Halfway through the meal, Eleanor rose suddenly. She walked to the sideboard where the place settings were kept and returned with a new arrangement of plates and silverware. With deliberate movements, she removed Nathan's place setting that had been left empty beside mine, a traditional gesture of remembrance, and replaced it with the new arrangement. The table was reset to exclude the empty place, and in doing so, pushed me even further from the family grouping. The message couldn't have been clearer. Nathan was gone, and with him, my tenuous connection to this family. Eleanor, Thomas said quietly, perhaps we should discuss the arrangements for the will reading tomorrow. Eleanor nodded. Mr. Halloran will be here at 10. Just family, of course. My fork paused halfway to my mouth. I should be there, I said, my voice quiet but firm. Eleanor's eyes met mine, cold as the rain outside. I don't think that will be necessary, Cassidy. We can handle Nathan's affairs. I'm his wife, I said, the words feeling strange in my mouth. Wife. Widow. The transition had happened so suddenly. For 3 years, Thomas interjected. This family has held this estate for generations. Nathan would want it properly managed. I set my fork down, appetite gone. Nathan would want me included. Eleanor dabbed at her lips with her napkin, then placed it deliberately beside her plate. You can grieve somewhere else, she said, each word precise and cutting. This isn't your home anymore. A pause. It never really was. The silence that followed was absolute. Sarah looked down at her plate, uncomfortable but unwilling to contradict her mother-in-law. The cousin, Robert, I now remembered, shifted in his seat but said nothing. I could have argued, could have shouted or cried or reminded them that Nathan had loved me, had chosen me. But the fight had drained out of me 3 days ago when the police officer had shown up at our door. Instead, I stood up calmly, placed my napkin on the table, and walked out of the dining room without a word. In the grand hallway, I stopped before the framed photo of Nathan and me on our wedding day. I pressed my fingers to my lips, then to his smiling face behind the glass. From the small overnight bag I'd brought, I pulled out my coat. There was no one in the hall to witness my departure, no one to try to stop me. Outside, the rain had slowed to a drizzle, but I didn't open my umbrella. The cold drops felt real in a way nothing else had since Nathan's death. As I walked down the long driveway, memories flooded back unbidden. Nathan's laughter as he told me about his mother's horrified expression when he'd announced our engagement. The way he'd held my hand under the table during those tense family dinners. The night he'd pulled me close in our bed and whispered, "They'll never understand what we have, and that's their loss. I'll protect you from them," he'd promised once. They can be controlling, especially my mother, but you're my family now. But he couldn't protect me anymore. My best friend Meredith lived 20 minutes away by car, but I had no vehicle. The Whitmores had arranged for me to be driven to the funeral, and I'd been expected to return to the estate afterward. I called a rideshare from my phone, standing at the end of the driveway as the headlights of the approaching car cut through the darkening evening. Meredith was waiting at her apartment door when I arrived, her face creased with concern. "I saw your text," she said, pulling me into a fierce hug. "Those absolute vultures. I could kill them." Once inside, she poured me a glass of wine and sat beside me on her small couch, waiting patiently as I recounted the evening's events in halting sentences. "You can stay here as long as you need," she said firmly. "But what about your things? Your clothes, your—" "I'll go back tomorrow morning," I said. "They'll be at breakfast. I can slip in and get what I need." Meredith's apartment had only one bedroom, but she insisted I take it while she would sleep on the couch. Alone in her room, I finally allowed myself to cry, silent tears that soaked into the pillow. When the storm of grief passed, I reached into my bag and pulled out a sealed envelope. Nathan had given it to me on our 2nd anniversary, his expression unusually serious. "Keep this somewhere safe," he'd said. "Open it only if they turn on you." I'd laughed then, thinking it melodramatic. "Your family doesn't like me, but turn on me? That's a bit much, isn't it?" He hadn't laughed in return. "Just keep it, Cass. Hopefully, you'll never need it." My hands trembled slightly as I broke the seal. Inside was a handwritten letter in Nathan's neat script and a folded piece of paper. "My darling Cassidy, if you're reading this, 2 things have happened. I'm no longer with you, and my family has shown their true colors. I'm so sorry for both. In our safe deposit box at First National, key in my desk drawer, combination August 24th, 19, you'll find a file with all the documentation you need. Most importantly, there's a copy of the property deed with your name on it. Don't let them push you out of what's rightfully yours. Don't let them erase what we built together. All my love, always, Nathan. The folded paper was a photocopy of a property deed, not for the Whitmore estate, but for our home. Both our names were listed as owners, with a note about right of survivorship. I hadn't known Nathan had done this. When we bought the house, I'd been between jobs, and he'd said he'd handle the paperwork temporarily until we could add my name later. He had protected me after all. I slept fitfully that night, waking before dawn. I dressed in the same clothes from yesterday. I hadn't planned to stay away from the estate, and wrote a quick note for Meredith before slipping out. The early morning bus took me within walking distance of the Whitmore estate. The house was quiet when I let myself in with the key Nathan had given me years ago. Eleanor and Thomas would be in the breakfast room at the back of the house at this hour. I made my way silently up the grand staircase to the guest room where I'd been staying. The door was open. I stepped inside and froze. The room had been cleared out. My suitcase was gone, the closet empty of the few clothes I'd brought. The bedside table where I'd left my jewelry box, containing my mother's pendant and my grandmother's ring, was bare. A sound behind me made me turn. Eleanor stood in the hallway, key ring in hand. She had just locked the door to the master bedroom, Nathan's childhood room, where his personal effects would be kept. "You shouldn't be here," she said, her voice level. "Where are my things?" I asked. "Packed away for you. Thomas will have them sent to wherever you're staying." The calm dismissal in her tone made something harden inside me. I had lost my husband, my partner, my best friend. I would not lose my dignity as well. "I'll need the key to Nathan's desk," I said. A flash of something surprise? Concern? Crossed Eleanor's face before her mask of composure returned. "Whatever you need from his desk, I can get for you later." "The key, please, Eleanor." "I'm afraid that won't be possible today. We're meeting with Mr. Halloran shortly." I didn't argue further. I simply nodded and walked past her, down the stairs and out the front door. The sun was rising now, casting long shadows across the manicured lawn. I didn't look back. That afternoon, in Meredith's apartment, I wrote a letter to myself. A promise. A plan. "Dear Cassidy, today you walked away. Not because you're weak, but because you're smart enough to know when to fight. Nathan believed in you. He prepared for this. Trust him. Trust yourself. First, secure what's legally yours. Then, remember who you are beyond being Nathan's widow. Finally, don't let them define his legacy or yours. You loved him. He loved you. That's what matters in the end."
C.
The next morning, I dressed in the one professional outfit Meredith had that fit me, a navy blue dress that was slightly too large but looked intentional when belted. I pulled my hair back into a neat bun, applied minimal makeup, and put on the small pearl earrings Nathan had given me for our first anniversary. The county records building was quiet at this hour. I approached the front desk with a confidence I didn't entirely feel. "Good morning," I said to the clerk, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes. "I need to review the latest property ownership records for 1542 Oakwood Drive and 328 Elmhurst Lane." The first address was our home. The second was the Whitmore estate. "Name?" the clerk asked. "Cassidy Blake." I paused, then added, "Cassidy Whitmore." It was time to claim what was mine. The reading of the will took place in the Whitmore estate's library, a room lined with leather-bound books that Nathan had once told me few family members actually read. I arrived precisely at 10, ignoring the surprised looks when I walked through the door. Eleanor sat regally in a wingback chair, Thomas standing behind her like a sentinel. Mr. Halloran, the family lawyer, appeared uncomfortable as he arranged papers on the antique desk. He was a tall, thin man with wispy gray hair and wire-rimmed glasses that he constantly adjusted. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said with a small nod in my direction. "I wasn't sure if you'd be joining us." "I'm still Nathan's wife," I replied evenly, taking a seat across from Eleanor. Thomas cleared his throat. "Let's proceed, shall we? We all have arrangements to make." Mr. Halloran adjusted his glasses again. "Yes, well, this is, of course, a preliminary reading. The full probate process will take some time." He picked up a document and began to read in a formal tone. As the legal language washed over me, one fact became increasingly, shockingly clear. According to this will, everything, our home, Nathan's investments, his share of the family business, was left to Eleanor as trustee, with Thomas named as secondary beneficiary. There was no mention of me at all. That can't be right, I said when Mr. Halloran finished speaking. Nathan and I discussed this. Our house, at least. The will is quite clear, Thomas interrupted. Mother will oversee all assets until the estate is settled. Eleanor didn't smile, but there was satisfaction in her eyes as she gathered her handbag. Mr. Halloran, please send any necessary paperwork to the house. Thomas will handle the details. She stood, nodding to the lawyer. Thank you for your time. As they moved toward the door, I remained seated, my mind racing. This wasn't what Nathan had planned. His letter had mentioned the property deed, the safe deposit box. Something wasn't right. Mr. Halloran paused before following them out. He glanced back at me, then at the closing door, and made a subtle gesture with his hand. Wait. After Eleanor and Thomas had gone, he returned to the library, closing the door behind him. Mrs. Whitmore, he said in a lowered voice, might I have a word? Of course, I replied, hope flaring in my chest. He sat across from me, his posture tense. I can't say much, professionally speaking, but he removed his glasses, polishing them on his handkerchief. Nathan came to see me about 6 weeks ago. He submitted a codicil to his will. A codicil? An amendment, Mr. Halloran clarified. It was quite specific regarding provisions for you. My throat tightened. What happened to it? It was never finalized. Nathan was called away on some family emergency before we could complete the paperwork. He promised to return the following week, but he trailed off, putting his glasses back on. I've looked for my notes from that meeting, but they seem to have been misplaced. The implication hung in the air between us. Is there anything I can do? I asked. Mr. Halloran reached into his jacket pocket and slid a business card across the table. My private number is on the back. Call me tomorrow afternoon. He stood quickly. I should go. They'll be wondering what's keeping me. That evening, I used the key from Nathan's desk, the one I'd retrieved from our home while Eleanor was occupied with the will reading, to access our safe deposit box at First National Bank. The bank manager's expression was sympathetic when I explained I was a recent widow, checking my ID against the account records before leading me to the private room. Inside the metal box was exactly what Nathan had promised, a folder of documents and a small USB drive. The original deed to our home showed both our names, properly notarized. There were also insurance policies I hadn't known about, investment account details, and a sealed envelope marked personal. I opened it with trembling fingers. Inside was a handwritten note. My love. If you're reading this, check the USB. Remember that whatever happens, you were always meant to inherit what we built together. It was never meant to go back to them. Yours always, N. I slipped everything into my bag and thanked the manager on my way out, my mind already racing ahead to what might be on the USB drive. Back at Meredith's apartment, I plugged the USB into my laptop. There was only one file, a video. When I clicked play, Nathan's face filled the screen, and my heart seized in my chest. He was sitting in his home office, sunlight streaming through the window behind him, illuminating his dark hair with golden highlights. Hey, Cass, he said, his smile gentle but his eyes serious. If you're watching this then, well, I'm gone, and they're trying to take everything.
I'm sorry.
I thought we have more time to get all the legal stuff properly sorted. He ran a hand through his hair, a nervous gesture I knew so well. I made sure your name is on the deed to the house. That's legally binding, no matter what they try to pull with the will. But there's more they don't know about. He leaned closer to the camera. If they ever push you out, don't let them win. You were always meant to inherit this. All of it. Not just for you, but because it's what my grandfather would have wanted. He looked away briefly, then back at the camera. I love you, Cassidy. More than anything. Remember that. The video ended, and I sat in stunned silence, tears streaming down my face. After a few minutes, I replayed it, trying to catch any details I might have missed. Then I called Meredith. She arrived an hour later, takeout bags in one hand and a bottle of wine in the other. As a paralegal at a local law firm, she had experience with estate matters, though not specifically probate law. "This is good," she said after reviewing the documents and watching the video. "The deed alone gives you solid standing. The video shows clear intent." She took a sip of wine. "We need to file a claim with the probate court immediately." "Will that be enough?" I asked. "It's a start. We'll need more emails, texts, anything showing Nathan's intentions. And we should look into whether that codicil Mr. Halloran mentioned still exists somewhere." While Meredith made notes, I scrolled through my phone, looking at old texts from Nathan. There were several mentioning updating paperwork and making sure you're taken care of, but nothing explicitly stating his plans for the will. "Eleanor and Thomas are planning to sell the house," I said suddenly, remembering a snippet of conversation I'd overheard at the funeral home. "They can't sell your house without your signature," Meredith reminded me. "Not with your name on the deed. Not our house, the estate. Nathan's childhood home." Meredith looked up from her notes. "Can they do that? I thought it was family property." "It is. But apparently Eleanor has full control until Thomas inherits." I hesitated. Nathan always said his grandfather wanted the estate preserved, not sold. It's part of why he and his mother clashed so often. The next day, as I was leaving the courthouse after filing initial paperwork, a hand grabbed my arm, pulling me aside. Thomas towered over me, his face flushed with anger. "What do you think you're doing?" he demanded, his voice low but intense. "Filing claims on the estate?" I pulled my arm free. "I'm protecting what's legally mine." "You have no right," he hissed. "You were just his wife. We're his blood. 3 years doesn't erase a lifetime." Something cold and resolute settled in my chest. "You should check your mother's safe before you assume anything," I said calmly, watching his expression shift from anger to uncertainty. "Nathan left more than you know." I walked away, leaving him standing there, but inside, I was shaking. The confrontation confirmed what I already suspected. They were watching the court filings, preparing to contest anything I submitted. The formal notice from the probate court arrived 2 days later. A hearing had been scheduled for the following month. It wasn't much time to prepare, but it was something. A chance. That night, I dreamed of Nathan. Not of his death or funeral, but of a sunny afternoon in our backyard, his laughter echoing as he chased our neighbor's dog who had escaped through a hole in the fence. In the dream, he turned to me and said, "Remember the key, Cass. It's always been about the key." I woke with tears on my cheeks, but a renewed sense of purpose in my heart. The battle had begun. Morning light filtered through Meredith's kitchen blinds as we spread documents across her small table. Coffee cups and legal pads created a makeshift war room as we built our case piece by piece. "Look at this," Meredith said, pointing to an old property title transfer she'd unearthed from the county archives. The estate was transferred from Nathan's grandfather to his father under unusual circumstances. I leaned closer. The document showed a transfer that had occurred 30 years ago, just months before the grandfather's death. "The signature looks different from earlier documents," I noted, comparing it to another paper. "Exactly. And look at the notary, Margaret Whitmore. That's Eleanor's maiden name." I finished, a chill running through me. She notarized her father-in-law's signature, transferring the property to her husband? Meredith nodded grimly, which raises questions about the legitimacy of the entire chain of ownership. We were interrupted by a knock at the door. Meredith peered through the peephole, then turned to me with a confused expression. "It's an older man. Says his name is Ronan." My heart jumped. "Nathan's uncle," I explained, standing quickly. "He was estranged from the family years ago. I only met him once at our wedding." Ronan Whitmore was a tall, lean man in his late 60s with the same strong jawline as Nathan, but none of his warmth. His silver hair was cut short, his posture military straight. He declined Meredith's offer of coffee, his blue eyes, so like Nathan's, fixed on me. "I heard about what Eleanor's doing," he said without preamble, his voice gruff. "Nathan called me 2 months ago. Said he was worried about you if anything happened to him." "You were in touch with Nathan?" I asked, surprised. He said you and Eleanor hadn't spoken in years. We hadn't. Still haven't. A ghost of a smile crossed his weathered face. Eleanor doesn't forgive people who cross her. Never has. What did she do to you? Meredith asked bluntly. Ronan's expression hardened. Same thing she did to her husband. Same thing she's trying to do to you. He looked directly at me. She rewrites history. Erases people. Changes documents. She's been doing it since she married into the family. Do you have proof? I asked, hope rising in my chest. Nothing that would stand up in court, he admitted. But I know what happened to my brothers when he died. Eleanor made sure everything went exactly how she wanted it. After Ronan left, promising to look for any documents that might help, I sat quietly, turning his words over in my mind. They aligned with something Nathan had told me once, a memory that now surfaced with painful clarity. We had been sitting in our living room, a fire crackling in the hearth, when Eleanor had called. She wanted Nathan to sign some family business paperwork the next day. After hanging up, he'd seemed troubled. What's wrong? I'd asked, curling against his side. Nothing important, he'd said, but then added, it's just, my mother always has a backup plan. If you don't sign what she wants, she finds another way to get what she wants. That sounds ominous, I joked. He hadn't smiled. With my mother, it is. Meredith's voice pulled me back to the present. I found something, she said, spinning her laptop toward me. Public records from a case 15 years ago. Eleanor contested her sister-in-law's claim to some family heirlooms after Nathan's father died. I scanned the document. She won. Yes, but look at the judge's comments. He notes irregularities in the documentation, but ruled in Eleanor's favor because the original will couldn't be produced. Because Eleanor had it, I murmured. Exactly. With each piece we uncovered, my resolve strengthened. I filed an injunction to prevent the sale of our house, which the court granted temporarily until ownership could be established. The move infuriated Eleanor and Thomas. I knew because Mr. Halloran called to warn me they were threatening legal retaliation. They're claiming defamation, he said, sounding tired. It's a scare tactic, but be prepared. A few days later, a letter arrived from Janet Winters, the notary who had witnessed our property deed. It was a formal statement confirming she had notarized the document at Nathan's explicit request. Mr. Whitmore was adamant that his wife be protected through joint ownership. He specifically mentioned concerns about family interference in the event of his death and wanted to ensure Mrs. Whitmore's rights were legally established and documented. It was another piece of evidence showing Nathan's clear intentions. The most startling development came unexpectedly. I had gone to the estate to retrieve some personal photos Eleanor had forgotten to include with my packed belongings. Using the key Nathan had given me years ago, I let myself in during what I knew was Eleanor's weekly hair appointment. I was in the hallway outside Nathan's old bedroom when I heard voices from Eleanor's study, Thomas and his mother, who had apparently returned early. You said the deed was destroyed, Thomas was saying, his tone accusing. Now her lawyer is waving it around in court. It was a copy, Eleanor snapped. Nathan must have made duplicates. It doesn't change anything. It changes everything. The judge already granted her injunction. If she gets the house, she won't get anything, Eleanor cut in. I've handled worse than some shop girl with delusions of belonging to this family. Their voices moved toward the door, and I slipped quickly into an adjacent room, my heart pounding. Once they had passed, I took out my phone and checked the recording I'd started when I first heard their voices. It had captured everything clearly, including Eleanor's admission about the deed. That night, alone in the small guest room at Meredith's apartment, I finally allowed myself to break down completely. The weight of grief, betrayal, and the constant battle became too much to bear. I sobbed into my pillow, clutching my phone with Nathan's video playing on repeat. His face, his voice, the love in his eyes when he looked at the camera, at me, was both comfort and torture. I miss you, I whispered to the screen. I don't know if I'm strong enough for this. But the next morning, I rose early, washed my face, and continued the fight. Because that's what Nathan would have done. That's what he had prepared me to do. A newspaper article from 3 years ago provided another crucial piece of information. It was a small piece about local philanthropy, easily overlooked, but Meredith had found it during her research. Nathan Whitmore, grandson of the late philanthropist Harold Whitmore, has donated the historic Whitmore estate to a newly formed community trust, with provisions for its preservation as a cultural landmark. Nathan Whitmore and his wife, Cassidy Blake Whitmore, are listed as co-directors of the trust. "This is huge," Meredith said when she showed me the article. "If Nathan actually created this trust, then neither Eleanor nor Thomas has the right to sell the estate," I finished. "But why didn't Nathan tell me about this?" "Maybe he did plan to," she suggested gently. "Maybe he ran out of time." As we prepared for the upcoming hearing, Mr. Halloran provided one final piece of information that gave me hope. Judge Patricia Callahan had been assigned to our case. "Eleanor crossed her professionally years ago," he explained during a discreet meeting at a coffee shop far from the Whitmore estate. "Nothing that could require recusal, but enough that you'll get a fair hearing." "What happened?" I asked. Mr. Halloran adjusted his glasses. Judge Callahan was a junior partner at a firm representing a client against the Whitmore business interests. Eleanor had some evidence suppressed through connections. The judge never forgot it. For the first time since Nathan's death, I felt a flicker of something like optimism. Perhaps justice was possible after all. Perhaps I could honor Nathan's wishes and protect what we had built together. As the hearing date approached, I spent hours preparing with Meredith, reviewing documents, practicing my testimony, steeling myself for the confrontation to come. I placed Nathan's letter in a frame beside my bed, reminder each morning of why I was fighting. The night before the hearing, I visited Nathan's grave for the first time since the funeral. The headstone was elegant black granite, Eleanor's choice again. I sat on the damp grass beside it, tracing his name with my fingertips. "I'm fighting for us tomorrow," I told him softly. "For everything you wanted to protect. I won't let them erase what we had." A gentle breeze rustled through the cemetery trees, and somewhere in the distance, a night bird called. I sat there until darkness fell completely, gathering strength from the silence and the stars above. Tomorrow, the real battle would begin. The morning of the hearing dawned clear and bright, a stark contrast to the storm clouds that had hung over me since Nathan's death. I dressed with care in a simple black dress, professional but understated. Around my neck, I wore the small silver pendant Nathan had given me on our first anniversary, tucked beneath my collar where only I would know it was there. His letter rested in my bag, a talisman of sorts. Meredith picked me up at 8, her expression a mixture of determination and concern. "Ready?" she asked as I slid into the passenger seat. "As I'll ever be," I replied, smoothing invisible wrinkles from my skirt. The courthouse was an imposing brick structure in the center of town. As we climbed the wide stone steps, I spotted Thomas and Eleanor arriving in Eleanor's sleek black sedan. Eleanor emerged first, immaculate in a navy suit that probably cost more than 3 months of my salary. Thomas followed, his expression grim but confident. Between them walked a distinguished man I recognized as James Bennett, one of the most expensive attorneys in the county. "They brought in the big guns," Meredith murmured. "We have the truth," I reminded her. Inside, the courtroom was smaller than I'd imagined, with polished wooden benches and walls paneled in dark oak. Eleanor and Thomas sat on the left side of the aisle, their posture rigid with certainty. I took my place on the right, with Meredith beside me and Mr. Halloran hovering uncertainly in the background. A side door opened and the bailiff called out, "All rise." The Honorable Judge Patricia Callahan presiding. Judge Callahan was a composed, stern woman in her 50s with silver-streaked brown hair pulled back in a neat bun. She moved to the bench with efficient grace, her expression revealing nothing as her gaze swept over the courtroom, pausing briefly when it reached Eleanor. "Be seated," she said, her voice clear and authoritative. "We are here in the matter of the estate of Nathan James Whitmore. I've reviewed the initial filings." She looked down at the papers before her. "This appears to be a dispute over property ownership and the execution of the deceased's will. Is that correct?" The lawyers confirmed, and the proceedings began. Thomas was called to testify first, rising to take the stand with practiced confidence. Under questioning from Bennett, he painted a picture of Nathan as someone who had temporarily strayed from family traditions and expectations. "My brother had a good heart," Thomas said, his voice carrying just the right note of grieving sincerity. "But he was always impulsive." The marriage to Ms. Blake was very sudden. "Mrs. Whitmore," I whispered to Meredith, who squeezed my hand in response. "And what was your understanding of your brother's intentions regarding his estate?" Bennett asked. Thomas straightened. "Nathan understood the importance of keeping family properties within the family. Our estate has been in Whitmore hands for generations. He would never have intended for it to pass outside the bloodline." "And his relationship with his wife in the months before his death?" "Strained," Thomas replied, with just a moment's hesitation that only I seemed to notice. "He spent more time at the family estate, less at the house he shared with her." It was a blatant lie. Nathan had been at the estate more often because Eleanor had been ill, and he'd been helping to manage family business matters while she recovered. But the lie was delivered with such smooth confidence that I saw the judge making notes. When it was my turn to take the stand, my legs felt unsteady beneath me. I focused on my breathing as I was sworn in, then took my seat facing the courtroom. Eleanor's gaze was cold and dismissive. Thomas looked somewhere over my left shoulder, avoiding eye contact. My lawyer, David Williams, recommended by Meredith's firm and working for a significantly reduced fee, approached with a reassuring smile. "Mrs. Whitmore, could you tell the court about your marriage to Nathan?" I spoke plainly, keeping my voice steady despite the grief that still caught in my throat. "We were married for 3 years, but we'd known each other for 5. Nathan was kind, thoughtful, and deliberate in his decisions. He wasn't impulsive, as his brother suggested." I paused, then continued. "He was also very aware of his family's concerns about our marriage. Did Nathan ever discuss his wishes regarding his property with you?" "Yes," I said firmly. "He made it clear that our home was meant to be mine if anything happened to him. That's why he put my name on the deed." I explained about the safe deposit box, the documents we'd found, and Nathan's explicit statements about protecting me from his family's potential actions. "And did Nathan express any wishes regarding the family estate?" "He told me his grandfather had wanted it preserved, not sold or developed. That's why he created the community trust." Bennett objected immediately. "Your Honor, there's no evidence of any such trust beyond a newspaper article that could easily contain errors." "The documentation is included in our filings," my lawyer countered. Judge Callahan nodded. "I'll review it." Continue. When Bennett cross-examined me, his approach was to paint me as a gold digger who had married Nathan for his family connections and wealth. His questions were carefully worded barbs designed to make me lose my composure. "Isn't it true that you were unemployed when you met Nathan Whitmore?" "I was between jobs," I corrected. "I managed a bookstore until it closed, then met Nathan while interviewing at his company's publishing division. A convenient place to meet a wealthy young man from a prominent family." I kept my voice level. "I met a kind man who loved books as much as I did. I didn't know about his family until our 3rd date." After my testimony, Meredith queued up the USB video on her laptop, which had been connected to the courtroom's display system. Nathan's face appeared on the screen, his blue eyes looking directly at the camera. "Hey, Cass," his recorded voice said, filling the silent courtroom. "If you're watching this then, well, I'm gone, and they're trying to take everything." As the video played, I watched Eleanor's face. For the first time since I'd known her, her composure cracked. Her lips pressed into a thin white line, and a muscle twitched in her jaw as Nathan's voice continued. "This home was always meant to be hers, no matter what happens to me." When the video ended, Judge Callahan removed her glasses, rubbing the bridge of her nose. "I think we'll take a 15-minute recess," she announced. "I need to review some of these supplemental documents in chambers." In the hallway outside the courtroom, I stood near a window, trying to calm my racing heart. The video had been powerful, Nathan's own voice confirming what I'd been claiming all along. But would it be enough? A shadow fell across me, and I turned to find Eleanor standing there, her eyes hard as flint. "That was quite a performance," she said, her voice low enough that only I could hear. The grieving widow fighting for justice. I said nothing, knowing any response would only give her ammunition. You'll regret this, she continued. He may have loved you, but he belonged to me. He was my son, my blood. Something inside me hardened at her words. And yet he gave me the key, I replied quietly. Eleanor's eyes widened slightly, and I knew she was wondering exactly what key I meant. The safe deposit box? The house? Something else she didn't know about? Before she could respond, the bailiff called us back into the courtroom. As we filed in, I noticed a new arrival. Uncle Ronan had slipped into the back row, a manila envelope clutched in his weathered hands. Judge Callahan returned to the bench, her expression grave. Before we proceed further, I've received a new affidavit that I believe is relevant to these proceedings. Mr. Ronan Whitmore? Ronan stood, walking forward with military precision. He was sworn in quickly, then took the stand. Mr. Whitmore, you're the brother of the late James Whitmore, correct? Nathan Whitmore's father. Yes, Your Honor. And you've submitted an affidavit regarding conversations with your nephew before his death? Ronan nodded. Nathan called me about 2 months before the accident. He was concerned about what would happen to his wife if something happened to him. He said explicitly that he feared his mother would try to erase Cassidy from the family if he wasn't there to protect her. Eleanor's lawyer jumped to his feet. Objection. This is hearsay, Your Honor. It's a dying declaration, my lawyer countered. And Mr. Whitmore has provided phone records confirming the call took place. Judge Callahan allowed the testimony to continue. Ronan spoke briefly but powerfully about Nathan's concerns and his clear intentions regarding both our home and the family estate. When court resumed after Ronan's testimony, Judge Callahan addressed both sides. I've reviewed the evidence presented today, including the video, the property deed, and Mr. Ronan Whitmore's affidavit. I've also examined the documentation regarding the purported community trust. She looked at each of us in turn. A decision won't be made today. The evidence is complex and requires careful consideration. She paused, then continued with unmistakable firmness. However, I've seen enough to place an immediate freeze on the estate. No property is to be sold, transferred, or altered in any way until final judgment is rendered. Is that understood? Eleanor's face remained impassive, but her knuckles whitened where she gripped her handbag. As we filed out of the courtroom, I overheard Eleanor's lawyer whispering urgently to her. You didn't tell me about the codicil. If Halloran testifies. Eleanor cut him off with a sharp gesture, but the damage was done. Even her own lawyer was beginning to doubt her case. Meredith squeezed my arm as we descended the courthouse steps. This is just the beginning, she warned. But it's a good beginning. I nodded, feeling the weight of Nathan's letter in my bag. For the first time since his death, I felt the faintest flicker of something like peace. The battle wasn't over, but at least now I had a fighting chance. 2 weeks after the hearing, I stood on the porch of what had been my home with Nathan, key in hand. The court had granted me temporary access while ownership was being determined, and I had delayed this moment for as long as possible, knowing it would bring both comfort and pain. The house smelled faintly of dust and stillness, the scent of absence. I moved through the room slowly, trailing my fingers over furniture that held the imprints of our life together. In the kitchen, Nathan's coffee mug still sat on the counter where he'd left it that final morning, now rinsed clean and turned upside down by someone's hand, Eleanor's, most likely, during her sweep of the property. I didn't cry. I'd done enough of that in the dark hours at Meredith's apartment. Instead, I methodically began checking the hiding places Nathan had created throughout the house: loose floorboards, false bottoms in drawers, hollowed-out books. Nathan had been playful about these secret spots, using them to hide birthday gifts or love notes for me to find. Most were empty now, cleared by Eleanor's thorough search. But in the garden shed, behind a stack of clay pots, I found something that made my heart race. The charred remains of a metal box, its lock broken, edges blackened from fire. Inside were fragments of paper, partially burned but still legible in places. Nathan's handwriting was unmistakable on the scorched corners. I gathered every piece carefully in a plastic bag, trying not to further damage the fragile evidence. That evening, Meredith brought over Daniel Fisher, a friend who worked as a forensic document analyst. He spread the burned fragments on a clean white cloth on her dining table, using tweezers and a magnifying glass to examine each piece. "Definitely deliberate," he said after an hour of careful examination. "Someone tried to destroy this, but they were interrupted or rushed. The fire didn't completely consume the document." "Can you tell what it was?" I asked. Daniel arranged several larger fragments together. "It's a will or a similar legal document. See this phrasing here? I bequeath and to my wife, Cassidy Blake Whitmore. And here's a date from about 3 months ago. That matches when Nathan went to see Mr. Halloran about the codicil," Meredith noted. Daniel took photographs of each fragment, then used his laptop to enhance and analyze the text. "There's more," he said eventually. "This section here refers to full ownership and control of all properties currently in my name. And this part mentions contrary to any previous arrangements." It was the confirmation we needed. Nathan had been planning a complete handover of assets to me, explicitly overriding any previous will that might have favored his mother or brother. "Will this hold up in court?" I asked. Daniel was cautious. "It's fragmentary evidence. But, combined with everything else you have, it builds a compelling picture of someone deliberately destroying evidence that contradicted their claims." The next morning, my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. It was Thomas. "We need to talk," he said without preamble. "Not at the house or the estate. Somewhere neutral." I suggested a coffee shop downtown in public view, but with private tables. When I arrived, Thomas was already there, an untouched cup cooling before him. He looked tired, the confident posture from the courtroom replaced by slumped shoulders and shadows under his eyes. "I want to offer you a deal," he said as soon as I sat down. $20,000. You drop all claims, walk away, never contact the family again." I didn't respond immediately, studying his face. There was something desperate in his expression that hadn't been there before. "Why now?" I asked finally. Thomas shifted uncomfortably. "It's a generous offer. More than fair for a 3-year marriage." "It's not about the money, Thomas. It's about honoring what Nathan wanted." He leaned forward. "Look, you don't understand what you're up against. My mother has been manipulating documents and people for decades," I finished. "I know more than you think." Thomas stared at me for a long moment, then stood abruptly. "The offer expires at the end of the week. Think about it." I didn't bother to respond as he walked away. There was nothing to think about. That afternoon, Meredith called with news. "You're trending," she said without preamble. "What?" "Someone leaked footage from the courtroom, Nathan's video. It's all over social media. People are calling Eleanor a grief vulture and worse." I felt a flash of dismay. As much as I wanted justice, I hadn't wanted this to become a public spectacle. Nathan had always been private, hating the attention that sometimes came with his family name. How bad is it? For Eleanor? Pretty bad. The court of public opinion has definitely ruled in your favor. For you, well, you might want to avoid the local news and your social media for a while. They're all trying to get statements. The following day, Ronan invited me to lunch at a quiet restaurant on the edge of town. He seemed troubled, fidgeting with his napkin in a way that reminded me painfully of Nathan. "There's something you should know," he said after we'd ordered, "about Eleanor and how she came to have so much control over the family assets." He told me a story that filled in many of the gaps I'd been wondering about. Eleanor had done to Nathan's father what she was now trying to do to me, manipulated documents, created emergencies that interrupted legal proceedings, and gradually assumed control of everything. "James, my brother, didn't see it happening until it was too late," Ronan explained. "By then, she had power of attorney, control of the accounts, everything. When he tried to change things, there was always some problem with the paperwork." "Why didn't you say something?" Ronan's weathered face creased with old regret. "I tried. James wouldn't hear it. And after he died, Eleanor made sure I was kept away from the boys. Nathan only reconnected with me after he met you." 2 days later, I visited Nathan's grave again. This time, I brought a copy of Judge Callahan's latest ruling, a temporary guardianship of the estate placed in my hands until final judgment. I read it aloud, my voice steady in the cemetery quiet. "You're winning, Nathan," I whispered, placing a single sunflower against his headstone. "She can't erase me. Not anymore." That evening, working late examining the USB drive again, Meredith discovered a hidden folder that had been overlooked in our initial review. It contained backups of Nathan's private emails, including one that proved pivotal, a formal notification to the family attorney rescinding a shared power of attorney arrangement with his mother. The email was dated just 3 weeks before his death and included the line, "Recent events have made it clear that separate legal representation is necessary to protect my interests and those of my wife." It was the smoking gun we needed, clear evidence that Nathan had been actively working to legally separate his affairs from his mother's control before his accident. As news of the court proceedings spread through the extended Whitmore family, something unexpected began to happen. Distant cousins, second uncles, and family friends started reaching out to me with their own stories of Eleanor's manipulations over the years. Most had no concrete evidence to offer, but their support bolstered my resolve. Ronan was particularly instrumental, sharing a letter Nathan had written to him just a month before the accident. In it, Nathan had described me as the most honest, loyal person I've ever known, the complete opposite of what our family has become. With each new piece of evidence, each small victory, I felt a subtle shift within myself. The paralyzed grief that had defined me in the weeks after Nathan's death began to give way to something stronger. I wasn't just fighting for property or money. I was fighting for the truth of our relationship, for the plans and dreams we'd shared, for the future Nathan had tried to secure for me. I began taking meetings with estate lawyers, carefully reviewing the options for the community trust Nathan had established. I contacted the Historical Society about preservation guidelines for the Whitmore estate. I started, in small but significant ways, to reclaim my voice and my power. The final probate hearing was set for a Tuesday morning in early spring. Overnight rain had washed the world clean, and sunlight glinted off puddles in the courthouse parking lot as I arrived. The hallways were crowded. Word had spread about the Whitmore case, and local reporters lingered near the courtroom doors, hoping for a statement or a glimpse of the principals in this family drama. Eleanor arrived with Thomas and their lawyer, all three maintaining a united front despite the cracks I knew had formed in their relationship. Thomas couldn't meet my eyes as he passed. Judge Callahan entered promptly at 9, her expression giving nothing away as she took her seat and arranged her papers. The courtroom fell silent, the tension almost palpable. "Before we begin today's proceedings," she said, her voice crisp in the quiet room, "I want to address something directly." She looked pointedly at Eleanor. "Perjury is a serious offense, especially when paired with destruction of evidence. This court does not look kindly on attempts to manipulate the judicial process." Eleanor's face remained impassive, but her shoulders stiffened slightly. Her lawyer leaned over to whisper something, but she gave a small shake of her head, dismissing whatever counsel he offered. The hearing proceeded with presentations from both legal teams. The evidence had grown substantially since our first court appearance. The reconstructed document fragments, the email rescinding the power of attorney, statements from family members about Eleanor's pattern of behavior, and expert testimony about the authenticity of Nathan's video and the property deed. When it came time for final statements, I was the last to speak. I stood before the judge, conscious of every eye in the room upon me. For a moment, I thought of that night at the Whitmore dinner table when Eleanor had told me I could grieve somewhere else, how small and erased I had felt. But that woman was gone now, replaced by someone stronger, someone who understood her own worth. "Your Honor," I began, my voice steady, "this case has been presented as a dispute over property and assets. But at its heart, it's about something much more fundamental." I paused, gathering my thoughts. I was his wife, not just in name, but in the life we built together. And he trusted me to protect it. I spoke of Nathan's intentions, his fears for what his family might do, and his efforts to ensure I would be protected after his death. I didn't attack Eleanor or Thomas directly. There was no need. The evidence spoke for itself. When I finished and returned to my seat, there was a moment of complete silence in the courtroom. Judge Callahan looked down at her notes, then removed her glasses. "I've reviewed all the evidence in this case thoroughly," she said. "The court finds that Nathan Whitmore's intentions regarding his estate were clear and deliberately documented through multiple means. The attempts to conceal, alter, or destroy those intentions constitute a serious breach of legal and ethical standards." She continued, outlining her ruling with methodical precision. "I was granted full ownership of our home and recognition as the primary beneficiary of Nathan's personal estate. The community trust Nathan had established for the family estate was validated, with me confirmed as its principal director. Furthermore," Judge Callahan added, "in light of evidence suggesting document tampering and potential fraud, this court is referring the matter to the district attorney's office for investigation into Mrs. Eleanor Whitmore's past handling of estate matters." Thomas was already on his feet before the judge finished speaking, striding out of the courtroom without a backward glance. Eleanor remained seated, her face a rigid mask, as the implications of the ruling sank in. Not only had she lost control of the assets, but she now faced potential criminal charges for her actions. As the courtroom emptied, Eleanor finally stood. For a moment, our eyes met across the room. There was no remorse in her gaze, only cold fury and something that might have been grudging respect. Then she turned and walked away, her back straight, her head high, a queen deposed but unwilling to show defeat. The next day, I returned to what was now legally my home. I moved through the room slowly, opening curtains that Eleanor had closed during her occupation, letting sunlight pour in through the windows. I donated the heavy antique furniture she had brought from the estate, replacing it piece by piece with items Nathan and I had chosen together. In the backyard garden, I pulled weeds from the flower beds Nathan and I had planted in our first spring together. New green shoots were already pushing through the soil, daffodils and crocuses, and the sunflowers he had loved. Life continuing, renewing, despite all attempts to erase it. As I worked, Ronan stopped by, bringing a box of old photographs he'd found, Nathan as a child, before Eleanor's influence had cast such a shadow over the family. His smile was the same one I had fallen in love with, open and genuine. "He would be proud of you," Ronan said simply, then left me to my memories and my garden. That evening, I found myself drawn to Nathan's office, a room I had avoided since his death. His presence seemed strongest here, in the books on the shelves, the pen marks on the blotter, the lingering scent of his cologne. I ran my fingers along the edge of his desk, remembering how he would look up and smile whenever I entered this room. The bottom right drawer had always been locked, his private drawer. He'd called it with a wink. I had never asked what he kept there, respecting his need for a space that was just his own. Now, I tried the key I'd found in his personal effects, and the lock turned smoothly. Inside was a single envelope with my name written on it in his familiar handwriting. My heart pounding, I opened it carefully. "My dearest Cassidy, if you're reading this, it means you fought back. And I'm proud of you. I always knew you had more strength than you realized. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you from them myself. I'm sorry you had to face their cruelty alone. But I'm not sorry I fell in love with you, despite knowing what my family was capable of. Whatever happens next, know that you gave me the happiest years of my life. Our home was more than a house. It was the future we were building together. Take that future and make it yours now. All my love, Nathan." Tears blurred my vision as I held the letter to my heart. He had known, had prepared for the worst while hoping for the best, had trusted me to be strong enough to stand against his family, if necessary. Later that night, Meredith came over with a bottle of wine to celebrate the court victory. We sat on the back porch, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. "You didn't just win a house," she said, raising her glass in a toast. "You got your voice back." I smiled, thinking of how far I had come from that silent figure walking away from the Whitmore dinner table. "I was never going to let them win," I said quietly. "Not after everything Nathan did to protect me." Meredith leaned back in her chair, studying me. "What will you do with the estate?" "The trust. Exactly what Nathan wanted. Preserve it. Open parts of it to the public. Honor his grandfather's legacy." I took a sip of wine, feeling the warmth spread through me. Eleanor and Thomas never understood that it wasn't about owning things. It was about protecting what matters. As Meredith left that evening, I stood in the doorway, watching her car disappear down the street. The house behind me was quiet but no longer empty. It was filled with memories and possibilities, with grief and hope intertwined. I thought back to that night when Eleanor had dismissed me from the dinner table, when I had walked away without protest. It hadn't been weakness that kept me silent then. It had been the quiet certainty that the battle would be fought on my terms, not hers. I walked away quietly that night. I whispered to myself, not because I was weak, but because I knew they'd never see me coming. What would you have done if someone tried to erase you from the life you built? If this story resonated with you, hit that like button and subscribe for more tales of quiet strength and unexpected justice.